Today I'm talking about how and why I grind my own grains. Welcome to Urban Prepping with Pam. I'm Pam. Okay, I'm going to make an attempt here to share my pantry with you. Let me get this in focus here. I have a small house and it's a small pantry, but hey, at least I have one. And my grains I buy in bulk, so I keep them in 5-gallon buckets. So on the left here, you see there's one, we took shelves out of our pantry in order to fit these buckets. But I have cornmeal and kidney beans back in the corner under there. Not kidney beans, pinto beans. I always say kidney, I meant pinto beans, a whole 5-gallon bucket. And then I have hard white wheat and soft white wheat, which is for bread making. I have oat groats here, and we eat oat groats every day, and so that's why we buy them in bulk. And then here I have sugar, and under there I have rice. So those are the bulk grains that I buy, and I keep a bucket up here, and then I have buckets downstairs for long-term storage. And so when I run out of a bucket here, we will buy more, fill it, and we'll exchange it for one downstairs. That way we rotate our food. Before we get started, I'd like to just invite you to subscribe to my channel and also click on the little notification bell so that you'll be notified every time I put up a new video. Today's video really is inspired by a viewer who had asked if I would do a video about grinding my own grains. I'm not sure which video she watched of mine, but I think it might have been the Azure Standard haul for September of 2020. And I did mention there about grinding my own grains, and I kind of exposed what they're doing to us with our cornmeal. So I don't know if that is what precipitated the request, but it doesn't matter because this is really a hot topic for me. It is something I feel very strongly about, and it didn't come overnight. Actually, this really just kind of gradually presented itself to me, and I'd like to share a little bit about that with you before I show you how I grind my grain. This really all started when I started, when COVID hit. My husband and I have been preppers for years, and you know, our kids know that we store a lot of food, and I can a lot of food, and we dehydrate a lot of food. But when COVID hit and there were shortages, my husband and I had to do an assessment about, you know, what are we going to do if we were locked down? We never thought anything like COVID would happen. I mean, we just figured there'd be a tornado or an ice storm or something like that, and we would need, you know, something to get us through. Things are still not open. We still have shortages. So we're going on, what, 7 months of this? And so my husband and I really did an assessment and said, you know, if we had to live for a year, I don't know how we'd do it. I mean, we thought we were doing pretty good until COVID happened. And then we realized just how much we were not prepared. Even though we thought we were, we realized we were not. So that started a lot of research on my part, and you know, researching about the kinds of things that we need to have in storage. And so I started buying flour, but of course flour, and I think it's still being rationed. I think the Costco only lets us get 1 bag, but it started with flour, so you couldn't find it. I mean, you just couldn't find it, and so I was sort of panicking. Then when it did come, they were rationing it, but I would get it whenever I could. And so we started putting flour away, but the more research and more reading I did, they were saying, you know, you don't want to put a lot of flour away because it just doesn't keep that long. I didn't really know that. So this has been a learning experience for me. And the more reading I did, and I went to a lot of LDS websites. I am not a Mormon, but let's face it, the Mormons have been living this life for, forever. And they're sort of an expert, I think, and I'm willing to listen to what they have to say when it comes to food storage because they've been doing it for a long time and they know what they're talking about. And so I started reading more and more, and they were saying you really should be storing the whole grains because grains will keep forever. They have found grains of wheat in pyramids and planted them, and they still grew, and you're talking 3,000 years later. So grains will keep forever. And so I thought, oh, gee, if I buy grains, what am I going to do with it? That means I have to make my own flour, and there's all that work, and I just wasn't really sure about what I wanted to do, but I kept investigating. And the more I started investigating, and the more I started reading, and then I came across a video where a book was recommended, and there were some, actually I kind of looked through the table of contents on Amazon, and I saw there was a recipe for Ezekiel bread. I used to buy Ezekiel flour. I've been baking my own bread for 45 years. And I used to buy something called Ezekiel flour. You can't find it anymore. You could buy Ezekiel bread, but they don't have the flour. I've searched high and low for it for years, and I can't find it. Well, there was a recipe in there for making your own Ezekiel flour and then making bread with the flour. So this was the book here, the Essential Home Ground Flour book by Sue Becker. And I have no affiliate to Sue Becker. I don't know who she is except from reading her book. So there's nothing in this for promoting this book for me except for the fact that it will change your life because it changed my life. Okay, I bought the book, and the girl on the video, she had mentioned, she says, well, the first half of the book talks about the history of grains and all this, and then the second half of the book is all about recipes and things. And I thought, well, okay, I'm going to buy the book for the recipes. I'll just skip that first part. So I bought the book. The book came, and of course I went to the back of the book, and there's a lot of wonderful recipes here, okay? But one day I was just kind of bored, and I grabbed the book and I started flipping through the front, and I started reading, and then I couldn't put it down. This is not just about the history of grains. There's nothing like that at all, actually. Sue Becker talks about how sick we have gotten since we've gotten away from grinding our own grains. And this happened around the turn of the 20th century, so around 1900, maybe a little bit before that. Flour started being processed on a grand scale. So women, instead of grinding their own grains at home, could go out and buy processed white flour. And people really liked the white bread, and bakers started using it, and all the stuff happening. And before you know it, I mean, it was like almost like a cultural revolution in a way, that people just got away from grinding their own grains, and it was just such a convenience thing, and they loved the taste. And it used to be that, rich people were the only people that could have white flour because of all the processing that was done to it. And of course it costed more. And so the peasants, they were the ones that had the whole grain flour. Well, the rich people had rich people diseases, and the peasants were actually healthier than the rich people were. But now at the turn of the 20th century, things really changed. But diseases started showing up that had never shown up in this country. I'm from the United States. So diseases started showing up in the United States that they had not seen here before. Beriberi, anemia, and some other, I can't remember the other one because frankly, I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the other disease. There were 3 diseases in particular that started showing up. And if you get the book, you can read about that. But what happened was, after a lot of research and after many years, it was finally in the 1930s, that they realized that this had really become an epidemic for Americans. And they realized that the problem was the white flour and all of the baked goods that were made with white flour, that white flour is so deficient. They've taken everything good out of the white flour, so there's no really vitamins or minerals left. And so the government stepped in and they said, you have to add they're all 4 B vitamins, riboflavin, niacin, they're all the B vitamins. And so at that time, there were 4 vitamins that were required that they be added back into the flour. Because when they process white flour, they're taking out the bran, which is the outer coating, and they're taking away the germ, which is the life of the seed. All grains are seeds. So the life of the seed is in the germ. So they've taken out the bran, they've taken out the germ, and that's where all the vitamins, the oils, the minerals, all the good stuff, there's antioxidants, all the good stuff has been taken out. So according to what I've read in Sue Becker's book, when they process 100 pounds of wheat to make white flour, they end up with 72 pounds of white flour. They've taken out 28 pounds of good stuff, basically. And so she talks about how during World War I, there was a grain shortage. And so because there's such a loss, a 28% loss in the weight of grain when you process it into white flour, in Denmark, they, during World War I, because of the grain shortage, they shut down basically the bakeries. And all of a sudden, housewives were having to grind their grain at home. And they noticed that during those war years, the health of the people increased amazingly. And the death rate went down by like 34%. And wow, it was a huge difference. They noticed this, but then the war was over, things got prosperous again, and it was right back to the old ways and these diseases that were popping up. Well, during World War II in Britain, they noticed that in Britain, they noticed the same thing that happened during the World War I in Denmark. And so there was something to this, and actually for a little while after the war in Britain, because it took them a while really to get back up to trading and being able to get goods again after the war. And so the government stepped in this country in 1941, and they demanded that the manufacturers of white flour put in these 4 B vitamins in order to get rid of these diseases that were showing up in horrible amounts of this disease. And so that's why when you buy flour, it says enriched. So they put in some vitamins and they're calling it enriched. Well, they're not telling you that they were forced to do that by the government because people were getting diseases because their product is so deficient in vitamins and minerals. Okay. That's what white flour is. I didn't know any of this. And so if you look at my other video, if I can do it, I'll put a link to my Azure Standard haul September 2020. I talk about cornmeal and how I discovered they were doing this exact same thing with cornmeal. So what they're doing is they take out, if you have a seed, okay, all seeds have some kind of a hull. And some of those hulls are harder than others. Like on wheat, it's just a very papery, thin layer that has to come off. It's not edible. The hull is never edible. So they take the hull off, and what you're left with is a seed. And the outer part of the seed is called the bran. The bulk of the seed is called the endosperm. And then the life of the seed is in the germ. Well, when they process grains to make white flour, they take out the bran and they take out the germ, and they sell that off, and they make animal feed out of that. So remember, that's 28% of the weight of that seed is in those 2 items. So they've taken those items out. They get more money. So they sell that for grain, you see, and then whatever is left in the endosperm is all that's left, and basically the only thing that's left in that endosperm is some protein and basically just starch. I mean, they've taken all the good stuff out. So when they've taken out all of the germ and the bran, you know, you're losing, like, I don't know, 30 different vitamins and minerals and you know, just oils and good stuff that's in that seed. And then they take out more than 30 of them and they put 4 back in and call it enriched. Well, okay, some B vitamins they had to put in. Then in the 1990s, they attributed birth defects to the fact that there was another B vitamin deficiency. And so in the 1990s, they had to put another vitamin back into the white flour. So now white flour is enriched with 5 B vitamins because people were having diseases because they were eating the white flour. So that's just kind of in a nutshell of what's going on. And when I got to the point where it was like, I don't want to, I've been baking bread forever. And the thing is, I used white flour. I mean, and there was nothing good in there. It was like I was making starch. And so I decided, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and start buying grains, enough of the flour, and I'll have to get myself a grain mill. And I did a lot of research, and the grain mill that I bought is Wonder Mill, and I love my Wonder Mill. There are several other good ones out there. The Wonder Mill is German made. It's really it's gotten such good write-ups, and for the price, okay, for the price. And I'm going to say I paid about $300 for mine, okay? I think it was $300, $299, something like that. But now I've been buying whole grains. But it's not just wheat that I can grind in here. And I bought some cornmeal, but I don't think I'm going to do that anymore because after what happened when I compared the cornmeal I bought from Azure to the cornmeal that I had in my cabinet, and I saw that they were doing the same thing, I did a little more investigating, and actually I should be grinding my corn to make cornmeal right at the time that I'm going to use it. And so I'm going to use up what I have, and then I'm going to start buying the whole corn and grind. I can grind it in my mill, so that's not a problem. Okay, so here's the thing about grinding grains. Now, when you grind whole grains, you're exposing what's in the germ, and there's oil in the germ, and it's rich with vitamin E. But the thing is, once you grind a grain, it starts to oxidize immediately. It's almost like when you cut an apple and it starts to turn brown immediately, or if you cut an avocado, it starts to turn brown. That's oxidation. Well, the same thing happens with grains. So when you're going to be baking with whole grains, it's really best to grind them right before you use them so that you get all of those wonderful vitamins and minerals. And it's the same with the corn and cornmeal. It would be best to grind the corn and make your cornmeal right at the time that you're ready to use it. And so it's not a hassle. When you have an electric grinder like this, it's not a big deal. It's, you know, at first I thought, oh, there's no way I can do that, all the work. And I was working, but hallelujah, I have put in for my retirement. So in a couple of weeks, I will be home full time. And so I understand for working women how you might think this is difficult, but I've been doing this and working. It's not a big deal. It's less of a big deal when it comes to time and working and being tired. Believe me, I understand that. That has been my life for the last 20 years. So when I started buying the whole grains, I buy them in bulk because it's really a lot cheaper that way. You will save so much money if you just start grinding your own grains. It's going to pay for that mill is going to pay for itself in you know, less than a year, I'm sure, because I'm saving so much. So when I buy my grains, I buy 25-pound bags. If I bought 50-pound bags, I could save more money, but I can't lift them. It's hard enough for me to lift 25 pounds. If I can get my husband's help, that's wonderful because it's not a big deal to him, but it's a big deal for me. So I buy just in case he's not around, which he was not around in September when I picked up my order. So I'm glad that I bought the 25-pound bags because I would not have been able to manage 50 pounds. I just wouldn't. So I buy them in 25-pound bags. A 25-pound bag of grain will fit perfectly in a 5-gallon bucket. So I buy food-grade buckets, and I find the best prices are at Menards. I've heard that you can also get them at Home Depot for basically the same price. But make sure it says food grade on the bucket, and it's going to be white because those dyes are not food grade. So look at where the white buckets are, the 5-gallon buckets, and then look on the side of the bucket, make sure it says food grade on it. And then for the buckets that I keep up in my pantry, and I have those Gamma Seal? Yeah, Gamma Seals they're called. And they twist off, so it's easy to get inside the bucket. So for up here in the kitchen, in my pantry, I use the Gamma Seals. But for the long-term storage, which we keep elsewhere in the house, I just use the regular lids that you buy to go with the buckets. So there's no need to have a more expensive Gamma Seal because it's just sitting in a bucket in a Mylar bag. So anyway, that's what I do. I buy in bulk. And what I've noticed is, before when I was baking, I would have to run to the store. Oh, I need this, I need that. I'm buying in bulk. I don't have to run to the store. I run to my pantry and I scoop out a couple of cups of grain and throw it in my grain mill. Boom, it's done. I've got my flour and I can make whatever it is that I want. So for those of you that are working and think that it might be a big deal, it's not a big deal because I've been doing it. I'm 65 years old. I work a lot. And I've still been able to maintain grinding my own grains, making my own flour, and baking things by scratch, and work and be the age that I am. So if I can do it, I promise you anybody can do it. Enough of that. I just wanted to get into the background a little bit. I really encourage you, and I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll find a link to this book, and I will put it below in the notes below. If you know how to get to the notes under a video, it's that little arrow. It's a little tiny arrow. You just click on the arrow and the notes will drop down. I'll put a link to this book. I bought it off of Amazon, and it's the Home Ground Flour book. Another thing I'd like to say just before we go, and I show you how I grind my grains, okay? I've been baking for a long time. When my kids were growing up, I baked my own bread a lot. It saved us money basically than going out and buying bread. And if I thought bread was expensive then, try looking on the shelves now how much they're charging for a loaf of bread. I can't believe it, what they're charging. And you can save a ton of money by making your own bread and grinding, especially if you're grinding your own grains. And it's so good for you. It's just the health benefits. And if you get the book and read, she talks about the health benefits of having freshly ground grains in your baked goods. And this is how we were meant to eat these things. But sometimes I would want to try to be healthier, and I would buy whole wheat flour, okay? And I couldn't stand the taste. It was just hard, and it just didn't taste good, and the kids wouldn't eat it. My husband wouldn't eat it. It just didn't do me any good to I tried. I really wanted to be healthy. So in my mind, that's what I thought whole grain wheat was. I was so wrong. If that's what your idea of grinding your own grains and baking bread with whole grain, it is nothing like what they call whole wheat bread on the shelves. That stuff's nasty. It's dry. It's the texture is just, and I didn't understand why. Well, in the book, Sue Becker talks a little bit about that. You'll want to read it for yourself, but just in a nutshell, what she says is they still separate the bran and the germ and make that white flour. Then what they do is they take some of the bran and the germ and put it back in. But they only put in what the government requires them to put in, okay? Well, that the germ has already been ground, and so the oils in the germ, as soon as you grind it, they start to go rancid. I mean, you know, like I said, there's oxidation, and of course the oils in the germ. There's oils, a wonderful vitamin E oil in the wheat germ, but you know, as soon as you grind it and it's exposed to air, it'll start to deteriorate. And eventually, it will go rancid, which is why it's got that nasty smell and why it has that nasty taste. And the stuff that you buy in the store that's called whole grain is nothing like the whole grain that I'm grinding and baking myself. Nothing like it. I was shocked. So the first loaf of bread that I made was the, I think it's called Basic Bread. I got it out of this book. And I thought, okay, so I used, there are different kinds of wheat. There's hard white wheat, soft white wheat, and hard red wheat. Those are the three wheats that you want to use, that you will normally use for a lot of your baking. There are a whole bunch of other grains. I've bought some of them because I like to experiment. But basically, hard white wheat is a bread flour. Hard white wheat is what I made my first loaf of bread with. And my husband and I were just like, we had never tasted anything like that, ever. Ever. It looks like white bread. It comes out like very white. It almost looks like a white bread that's made with unbleached white flour. Okay? Because it's got it's not white, you know, like, it's not like Wonder Bread white. It's sort of a yellowish white, okay, or beigey white. But it was soft and it was delicious. And we just looked at each other. It was like, here, you know, we're in our 60s. We're in our 60s and we've never had a loaf of bread like this before. We need to go back to how things used to be. I mean, it's nothing like that whole grain wheat that you buy at the store, or the whole grain bread that you buy at the store. Okay, so I've made that bread recipe a lot just a few days ago. And here, I actually have a piece that I'll show you. I finally made the Ezekiel bread. Now, the Ezekiel bread has a lot of different components in it, okay? But the main wheat that's in Ezekiel bread is hard red wheat, okay? And it does come out brown. But that's because there's other things in here. There's kidney beans and millet. And what else did I put in here? I mean, there's like 8 different grains that you put in here. Lentils, there's brown lentils in here. There's kidney beans, which are red. So, I mean, you can, this mill will do beans and other grains like millet. If you wanted, you could take dried garbanzo beans, put them in the mill, grind them up to a powder, and all you have to do is add boiling water to that bean powder, and you've just made yourself some hummus. You add a few other things to it to give it some flavor. You've got instant hummus that you could make in this grain mill. So the Ezekiel bread, that's more like the color that I think of when I think of whole grain bread that I buy from the store. And that was made with hard red wheat. So when you make bread with hard red wheat, it's going to be dark like that. But with hard white wheat, it is almost like a white bread. Now, what I'm grinding today, and I'm going to take you there in just a second, I'm grinding soft white wheat. So if you want to bake cakes, cookies, you know, any of those kind of baked goods, coffee cake, I don't know what else, donuts or whatever, you want to use the soft white wheat. This is my Wonder Mill, and I love my Wonder Mill. So how it works is we've got the the grinder on this side here. And what we have to do is we have to connect the canister to the grinder with the hose here. Just slips right in like that. And it is going to be a little bit loud. It kind of reminds me of a shop vac. So when I'm editing the video, I may cut the noise down. I'm not sure. This is what I'm grinding. This is soft white wheat. And soft white wheat is would be a replacement for pastry flour. So soft white wheat would be for cookies and cakes and other kinds of pastries that you might be making. It's not good for bread because the gluten content just isn't high enough. This way you can see what's going on inside the mill. So I'm going to turn the mill on and then I'll put the grains in. Once the grinder has stopped and your grain is milled, you disconnect this hose. It folds back in. And what you end up with is beautiful, almost white flour. It looks like unbleached flour with beautiful ground texture. See, just like what you would buy at the store practically, except much better. So that about does it for this video. I love my Wonder Mill. There are other mills out there, but if you're interested, I highly recommend the Wonder Mill. Thanks for watching my video. I hope you found it helpful, and I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.